Welcome to the Ravensvale Coven. The Coven features short, independent stories with themes ranging from dark horror and fantasy to any other disturbing fiction. The Coven contains stories written outside the ongoing storyline of the Ravensvale universe. The stories are submitted by listeners, authors, and storytellers and are carefully curated by the staff of Ravensvale. To learn about our guidelines for submitting your story for consideration, go to www.ravensvale.com and click on the Submission tab on the menu bar.
The Ravensvale Coven is part of our dark fantasy horror anthology podcast and may contain explicit language or thematic elements not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
She has had a lifelong romance with all things horror. Her obsession with writing and creating horror stories and movies has led to multiple projects both professionally and personally. Performing her original story, The Hallows, put your hands together and welcome Tiffany Weathers.
"What's happening?" a shrilled voice screamed over the speaker of his outdated iPhone 6 as his old '99 Ford Explorer barreled down a dark, rural road, the loudness of the engine suffocating the darkness surrounding the car and masking whatever might be lurking in the shadows. "I'm going to cut through the hollows, then I'll be somewhere familiar," he said, trying to sound calm, as his eyes darted fearfully side to side in the darkness of the barren, unkempt road. A pothole startled him, returning his attention to where it belonged in front of him. "Andrew, stay away from the hollows," but he interrupted her before she could continue. "Donna, it's fine. It's a shortcut. Let's just do this so we can throw the old bastard in the ground already," he sneered. He looked forward to the old man's send-off. His sister Donna was so much younger than him. She was the baby of the family, but right now she was playing a much bigger role than she should have at her age. One night after an argument with Andrew, their father got drunk and drove off into the woods, flipped his truck, leaving him dead and her to pick up the pieces. Andrew didn't really remember much about the fight. It was just another family spat that he and his father could almost call a tradition at this point. Now he could celebrate seeing the old man off to hell where he belonged. There was a long, exasperated sigh on the other end, then another pothole. "Andrew," her voice broke off into static. "You need to come back. Dad's not, don't die. Stay hollows." And then silence. "Donna? Donna!" He was already aggravated, but the phone disconnecting at that moment just sent him into a rage. He screamed like a feral animal, tears suddenly just streaming down his face. "God damn it, just give me a break already," he screamed at his wit's end. After the day he was having, it was bound to happen. He punched anything and everything he could in front of him. His car was already a hunk of junk. What difference did it make one more dent or ding make? At that moment, he didn't care about anything or anyone. All he cared about was expelling the rage and the hurt from his soul, and he did just that. Unfortunately, it came at a cost. His attention was diverted from the road, and an extremely unlucky tire would pay the price. His wheels drifted off the already broken pavement, hitting a downed tree limb, big enough to impale the tire, tearing it to shreds. He lost control of the SUV and was spun around so violently that he could only see blurred, streaky, headache-inducing lines against the darkness. After what felt like an eternity, the car stopped, still rocking side to side from the inertia. It took a second for Andrew to let out a long, very shaky sigh. not realizing that he had been holding in that in the first place. He was wrecked with anxiety. He checked himself for injuries, and once he was satisfied that nothing on him was broken or bleeding, he got out to inspect the damage to the car. His eyes darted into the darkness, trying to make sure nothing was lurking around him, but he couldn't see anything. The air felt dead and empty. Despite that, he still felt like there was something lurking in the shadows, waiting to attack. That feeling bubbled a sense of dread in the pit of his stomach. Being in the Hallows was a particularly terrifying experience. When Andrew was a kid, he'd heard all the horrifying stories about how the Hallows were haunted and evil. It was a place where lost souls went to either wait to go onto their just rewards or worse. The Hallows was a real life place in a large tract of the protected land situated almost in the middle of the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. So Andrew took most of the stories with a grain of salt. As the old folks told the tale, it was said that an old medicine man had cursed the land as he was forced to watch his people being mercilessly slaughtered. As a result, the land had soured and become evil, haunting the living and imprisoning the dead and dying. A lot of people had disappeared around the area, never to be found, never to be heard from again. The weather there was unpredictable, but the weather on this night was unnaturally calm. The air was perfectly still, except for the faint glow of the SUV's headlights. The clouds blocked out the light from the moon and stars, causing the night to be veiled in such a pitch-black darkness. He couldn't shake the sense of unease that was steadily creeping up his back. It was as if something was out there, watching, waiting, but he still felt alone. He hastily walked around the front of his SUV to check out the damage. "I hate the country," he mumbled to himself as his eyes landed on the shredded tire in the space where the missing piece of bumper should have been. "Ugh, I hate my fucking life." He rubbed his head, trying to quickly formulate a plan. "Anything to get me the hell out of here as fast as possible," he mumbled to himself again. "I fucking hate this place." He kicked pieces of the tire away, assessing the worst of the damage. It was fixable, at least temporarily, and luckily for him, something on his car always needed to be fixed. So he had everything he would need to get himself back on the road. The problem was the inky darkness. It seemed to steadily press in around him, making it nearly impossible for him to see anything. He could barely see a few inches in front of his face. He looked at his phone, 40%, of course. Unfortunately, as outdated as his iPhone was, 40% probably meant only about 10 or 15%, even without using the flashlight. 20 if he was lucky and didn't touch it or even look in its direction. Without a way to see, he decided it wasn't worth it and dialed the local AAA. The phone started to ring, but it was quickly overtaken by the sound of loud static. That had to be his imagination. The ringing turned to a shrill, almost sinister sound underneath the static. It felt to Andrew like he could hear whispering, and he could have sworn he heard someone calling his name through the static. That just wasn't possible. The dark was playing tricks on his mind. But then suddenly, the static and the ringing stopped, leaving him in utter silence. It was so quiet that all he could hear was the rapid, nervous beating of his heart. Another eternity later, Andrew had himself a tire replaced and the broken piece of bumper pulled off and tossed away. Once he had finished, he started to leave the Hallows feeling the slightest bit of relief. That relief was short-lived. A shrill ringing from his cell phone suddenly broke the silence again, high-pitched and unsettling, stopping him from stepping into the car. He flipped it over, expecting the phone to be dying or experiencing some glitch that happened every now and again. But instead, the name on the screen made his stomach drop and his breath left his lungs. The word Dad flashed in sinister red-orange glow on the screen as he tried to grasp what he was seeing. The phone rang and rang and rang. It never stopped ringing. It never went to voicemail. And the power button didn't react to his violent attempts to silence it. It just seemed to get more frantic. Andrew. A dry voice crackled through the phone, even as the shrill ringing and static continued, evilly dragging out his name like molasses being poured. It sounded like a lot of people talking at the same exact time. Their words were jumbled, and there were so many he couldn't make out, but there was absolutely no mistaking whose voice had spoken his name. How was that possible? That's how he knew he had to be hallucinating. His father was lying in a freezer somewhere, biding time until he could throw him in the ground. He had been dead for... Now that he thought about it, he couldn't remember when his father died. But it simultaneously felt like a lifetime ago, and only a few hours. The voices seemed to be getting closer. Not louder anymore, just closer. Remembering he was driving, he suddenly snapped his attention back to the road, but the phone never stopped ringing, and the voices still seemed to keep getting closer. But wait, he couldn't even remember getting back in the car. The last thing he remembered was the phone ringing and... No, he'd had enough. And as he often did, out of frustration, he acted impulsively, chucking the phone out the window into the inky darkness. He knew immediately it was a bad idea as soon as the phone was sucked into the darkness, where it seemed to vanish completely. He hit the brakes with such force that it sent everything in the car lurching forward, including him. His seatbelt snapped in two, and he was sent flying unnaturally forward into the windshield. But it didn't stop him from swinging his door open and stepping out into the darkness, expecting to recover the phone. There was no sickly red-orange light coming from the screen anywhere. There was no ringing or voices he could follow in the darkness to find the phone. It was just gone. Suddenly, he felt a severe pain in his chest where the seatbelt broke. Andrew. His head hurt from being flung into the windshield. Then he heard a dripping sound coming from just below him. Drew. Andrew. Andrew. How did he get here? His name echoed above him. Andrew. Fear quickly overtook his confusion when a light appeared above him, first in one eye and then the other. The pain in his chest stopped, but he felt like he couldn't take a breath. He thought he needed to get back into his car, but he was impossibly already in it again. Something was different this time. He felt off balance, upside down. He felt pain again and something wet running in his eyes, making them burn. When he looked up, or was it down, he could see his phone again, still ringing, but this time sitting on the ground next to him, broken. His father was calling. A brilliant flash of light, and Andrew found himself standing on the edge of the woods looking toward his explorer. The voices were closer and talking in hushed, panicked whispers, but he saw no one in the darkness. He could hear his dad and sister calling for him in the distance. His sister was begging and pleading for someone to help him. Another flash of light, and he felt his senses heightened. He could hear his heartbeat begin to race. Something was wrong here. The timeline was off. Then there was a long beeping sound, and someone shouted something he couldn't understand. Another brilliant flash of light, and a surge of electricity flooded his body. Another flash of light, and he could hear his heartbeat slowing down until it stopped. Another flash of light, and his father and sister were screaming. What is happening, he thought, unable to form the words with his lips. Another flash of light and the world went dark and silent. He felt cold. He felt alone and empty. When he opened his eyes, he was standing in the deep, dark woods of the Hallows. Something was going on just behind the trees. It looked like an accident. Oh, God, had he hit someone? He ran to the car, and he froze. He didn't understand. It was his car, crinkled up like a discarded piece of paper. He felt like his head was spinning. His sister and father were being comforted by paramedics on the other side of the street away from him. How was his dad here? He was dead, right? He walked toward them, calling out to them, but they never looked in his direction. They were looking at something else. When he went to them on trembling legs and saw what they were seeing, it was possible. It was impossible. There was no way. He was standing there, looking down on himself. He watched helplessly as the medics cut his seatbelt across his chest and pulled his broken, bloodied body out of the car, carefully laying him on a stretcher nearby next to broken car parts and skid marks. No, this isn't possible. But the memories came pouring back in. There had been a fight at home about him drinking and driving. His father had tried to take his keys and it had gotten physical. He'd run out of the house, gotten into his SUV, and sped off down the road into the Hallows. There was a loud crack of thunder, and without warning, he found himself back in the woods looking out at the accident again. So close, yet so far away. He started running back to his father and sister as they climbed into their car. But there was another crash of thunder, and he found himself thrown back into the woods, forced to watch afar as they drove away. Scared and confused, he took another step toward the taillights of his little sister's car. He tried to call out into the darkness, tried to follow them, but it was as if something was holding him, pulling him back to the place he couldn't escape. He was cold, and he was alone. He was trapped in the Hallows.
Wow, did you all enjoy that?
Ravensvale Coven is a production of Small Raven Media. Audio engineering and sound design by Nick Devan at Nicky D Sound. Copyrighted 2023 by Small Raven Media. All rights reserved.